Good morning. The first reading is from Exodus chapter 24, verse 12 to the end. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandments I have written for their instruction." Then Moses set out with Joshua, his aide, and Moses went up on the mountain of God. He said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we come back to you. Aaron and Hur are with you, and anyone involved in a dispute can go to them." When Moses went up on the mountain, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain, and on the seventh day the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Then Moses entered the cloud as he went on up the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. The second reading is from Matthew chapter 17, verse 1 to 9. The Transfiguration. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Trish. Morning, everyone. On the way to church this morning, our daughter Heather said, "Dad, you're preaching today, aren't you?" Yes, I am. "Well, what is it you're preaching about?" And I said, "Well, you're going to be here for the 9 o'clock and the 10:30. "Oh, it's all right, Dad, I won't be listening." So if you were at church for the 9 o'clock, I'm really sorry. Whether you were listening or hearing. Let's just pray. Open our ears, Lord, to hear your word and to know your voice. Speak to our hearts and strengthen our wills that we may serve you today and always. Amen. Now, over the years, I've traipsed up many a mountain and Munro for our Scottish listeners. Something which I'm finding increasingly more difficult, despite this athletic, supple, lithe body you see before me. No, that wasn't a joke. Okay, carry on. I studied languages at Bangor in North Wales, Snowdonia on your back doorstep. And each year there was a students group that would lead various walks in the area, but each year there was an opportunity to walk up Snowdon, which I did do. So it was great to be able to do the same with my wife Fiona and the kids the other summer. Although I have to admit there was an awful lot of we're just waiting for Dad. I've recovered, thank you very much for asking. Mountains, they feature a lot in the Bible. They're mentioned some 570 times. And about a third of all the mountains that are listed in Scripture, they have at least one major event occur on them, often playing a significant role in God's dealing with his people. So, see how many we recognize from this list. I'm not going to do all 570. For example, in Genesis, we read about Noah's Ark. It comes to rest on the top of Mount Ararat after the flood. There, God made a covenant with Noah, a promise that the earth would not flood again. We might think of Mount Sinai, where in Exodus, Moses receives the Ten Commandments. Again, another turning point between God and his people, as they learned the importance of obedience and the standards of living in step with God. On Mount Carmel, we read that there's a showdown between the prophets of Baal and Elijah, a contest to see which God would answer by fire. Spoiler alert, God did. Elijah would later flee for his life. And on another mountain, God would meet with him there, on Mount Horeb, which is actually another name for Mount Sinai. God spoke to Elijah, not in fire, but in a still, small voice. We read too that Jesus taught his disciples on the Mount of Olives. Now, you may be familiar with the phrase mountaintop experience. Before researching this sermon, I initially thought that this was the wow factor moment you get when ascending a mountain, the panoramic view all around you, perhaps knowing that you've earned it. But there's more to it than that. This is where there's a moment of epiphany, of realization that what people see and experience changes them. A spiritual experience. People leave the mountain with new perspectives, perhaps experiencing significant revelation from God. And perhaps thinking about it, maybe the Bible is where the term comes from. And so we come to this passage, perhaps the ultimate mountaintop experience. And perhaps not surprisingly, this event is recorded across 3 of the Gospels. In our reading from Matthew 17, but also in Mark chapter 9 and Luke chapter 9. You may know that each of the gospel writers, they had a particular audience in mind when they were writing their gospels. Maybe they wanted to stress something particular of Jesus' character to their readers. So although the accounts largely follow a chronological order, or a chronological form, they're not strictly in order. But what is significant about this event, this transfiguration event, is that in each of the gospel accounts, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, their account of the transfiguration comes directly after Jesus predicting his death and his resurrection for the first time to his disciples. In those passages, Jesus states that he would return in glory. And in this transfiguration event, Jesus takes just 3 disciples with him. As the scenes unfold, the disciples get a glimpse, a preview of what this glory, this divine glory, what this resurrection glory looks like. So let's just take a closer look at our reading. We read that Jesus isn't taking all of his disciples. This isn't a school trip. He's just taking Peter, James, and John. At the end of the passage read to us from Matthew 17, we read that Jesus asks them not to tell anyone about they had witnessed, at least not yet. Maybe asking 3 people to keep quiet is easier than 12. So the 3 disciples are alone on this mountain with Jesus, and I wonder what they expected to see or experience as they're walking along. Where's Jesus taking us? I suspect what did happen didn't feature on their list. They see Jesus' face shining like the sun. Now, this isn't Jesus merely reflecting another source of light. Jesus isn't backlit. This isn't the first recorded history of first century Jewish mirrors and light. Jesus is that source of light. This is his essence, his glory, and it's blinding. It's unmistakable. The disciples then witnessed Moses and Elijah appearing with Jesus, greats from the Old Testament. And although the disciples can see them, their whole focus and attention is on Jesus. In Luke's account of this event, we read that Moses, Elijah, and Jesus are discussing Jesus' death, unpacking what would happen in Jerusalem on that first Easter. Enter Peter, stage left, both feet. He interrupts their conversation by saying, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. And if you wish, I will put up 3 shelters. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." And on the face of it, those words are understandable. What the disciples are witnessing is incredible. If they had them, now would be the time to whip their phones out and capture the event in selfies or whatever. This was incredible. Sometimes it's easy to cast judgment on Peter. Peter's opened his mouth. What is he going to say now? Or after you've said it, "Thanks, Peter, we know what you meant." But sometimes I do feel that in the other Bible passages where Peter says something, he's just saying what other people, the other disciples, may also be thinking, but for whatever reason just won't say it. But it's interesting. What did Peter mean by "it's good for us to be here"? Was he being selfish? Maybe not considering the other 9 disciples that weren't with them? Peter's offer to build these shelters seems to suggest that there's parity, equality between Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, but they're really not. Moses and Elijah are just not on the same level. It's Jesus' face that is shining here. It's his clothes that are dazzling. Perhaps Peter meant to make this a kind of a more permanent thing. This is incredible. I want to bottle it. I want to preserve it, as if that were possible. In both Mark and Luke's accounts of the event, they simply state that Peter wasn't really sure what he was saying at all, that he was babbling, just saying something for the sake of it. What is certain is that what was happening demanded worship. It demanded adoration. not whipping out your carpentry set and building shelters. Regardless, while Peter is still speaking, God clarifies the situation. We read that a bright cloud appears, enveloping them, and from within God says, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Now, these are words that we've heard before at Jesus' baptism. Words of love from God the Father. Words that validate Jesus. Words that confirm Jesus' true identity and his authority. Jesus is more than just a great leader. Jesus is more than a good influence. Jesus is more than a faithful prophet. The disciples would have known about the significance of Moses, the lawgiver, and Elijah, the great prophet. In this transfiguration event, Moses represents the law, the 10 Commandments, ensuring that God's people lived in a right relationship with him. And as for Elijah, he represented the prophets, people who were in tune with God, instructing God's people, encouraging them to return and get in step with God, foretelling Jesus' life, his ministry, and death. Moses and Elijah are with Jesus because Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." If Peter, James, and John had any doubts before as to who Jesus was, then surely they had no doubts now. Jesus was lit up like the blazing sun. They had witnessed long-dead Moses and Elijah alive, standing with him. And they had heard the voice from heaven. Interestingly, in Deuteronomy 18, Moses spoke of a coming prophet. He said, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him." So what of the disciples? Well, struck down by fear because of what they had seen and heard, acutely aware that they were in the presence of God, they're struggling to make sense of it all. And in the midst of their confusion, their fear, and their shock, Jesus draws near to them. The scene has changed. They are once again alone with Jesus. The cloud has gone. Moses and Elijah have both gone. As a commentator on this passage put it, Moses and Elijah can fade into their supportive roles now that Jesus has come. Jesus doesn't set them a quiz. Pens out, explain what happened, I want to see you working out. He doesn't set them that. He doesn't challenge them to explain what they have just witnessed. He doesn't belittle them, but rather draws near to them. Get up. Don't be afraid. Words of reassurance from Jesus, their friend, their master. The disciples would have heard Jesus discussing with Moses and Elijah about the suffering and humiliation that was to come, about Jesus' death on the cross. And yet, Jesus had revealed himself as the Messiah, the culmination of the law and the prophets. The Transfiguration served to strengthen his disciples ahead of what was to occur in Jerusalem. Easter is not very far away. So what can we take from this? Well, the Transfiguration, it acts like a lens through which we can see a picture of Jesus' unique authority. Like the disciples, we get a glimpse of this divine, eternal glory. Just like the other mountaintop experiences we considered earlier on the other mountains, times when God drew near to his people, when God strengthened them, when God equipped them. This Transfiguration event offers hope. It offered the disciples hope, and it offers us hope, assuring us that God's glory is always there. Hope that Jesus is who he claims to be. Let's look at Peter again. Perhaps when thinking about the shelters, he considered Moses, Elijah, and Jesus as foundations for his faith. But he would later write in his letters that Jesus is the cornerstone. No mention of Moses, no mention of Elijah. Jesus is the cornerstone, a secure foundation for salvation and faith. The period of the year that we're in is Epiphany, that we follow in the Church of England lectionary. And interestingly, this period begins with Christ's baptism, and it ends with the Transfiguration. God's words of loving affirmation to Jesus, they bookend this period. The same question that Jesus asked his disciples in another passage is one for us to answer. Who do you say that I am? Just some words from Charles Spurgeon, the Christian author, to close. Though the apostles saw Jesus only, they saw quite sufficient. For Jesus is enough for time and eternity. Enough to live by and enough to die by. Look to him, and though it be Jesus only, that shall be enough to comfort and enough to save you. So wherever we find ourselves, whether we're on top of life's mountains or we're at the bottom of life's valleys, may Jesus be our cornerstone. May we all truly listen to him. Amen.